Do people ask you to repeat yourself when you speak English? Do you ever feel rushed or nervous and end up speaking too fast? Hello, my name is Georgiana. I want to tell you about my journey learning how to talk slowly in English. I used to speak too fast and jumble my words. People couldn't understand me, and I felt embarrassed. But everything changed when I made one small decision to slow down. It all started on a regular Tuesday morning, one of those days where everything felt just slightly off. I was running a few minutes late for work, juggling my iced coffee and tote bag while trying to answer emails on my phone. I work at a small marketing agency in Chicago, where being quick on your feet is part of the culture. But that day, my quick mouth got me in trouble. During our team meeting, I was asked to share my thoughts on a new client project. I knew what I wanted to say, and I had prepared for it the night before. But when I opened my mouth, it felt like someone had hit fast forward. My sentences spilled out so fast that even I couldn't follow myself. I could see my manager squinting, leaning in, trying to catch my words. A teammate asked, "Could you repeat that last part?" I froze for a second, unsure which last part they meant. I tried again, slower, but still not slow enough. The meeting moved on without my full input, and I sat there feeling invisible, frustrated, and ashamed. After the meeting, my manager pulled me aside. He wasn't angry, just honest. "You have great ideas, Georgiana," he said. "But sometimes you speak so fast that people miss them." His words stuck with me like glue. That sentence kept replaying in my mind. You speak so fast that people miss your ideas. I went back to my desk, still feeling the heat in my cheeks. I smiled and nodded through the rest of the day, but inside, I was spiraling. I started thinking about all the times I'd been asked to repeat myself, all the confused looks, all the polite nods that probably meant, "I have no idea what you just said." I thought it was just nerves or being passionate, but maybe it was more than that. Maybe I really did have a problem speaking too fast. That night, I walked home instead of taking the train. I needed the air, the quiet. As I strolled through Lincoln Park, the city sounds buzzing around me, I started replaying conversations in my head. I realized I didn't just talk fast at work. I did it everywhere. At the grocery store, at the bank, even with my friends. I was always in a rush to speak, like I was afraid someone would interrupt or stop listening. And sometimes they did. People would nod halfway through my sentences or change the subject before I finished my point. I used to blame them for not paying attention, but maybe I wasn't giving them a chance. When I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the voice memo app on my phone. I recorded myself talking about my day, just like I'd normally do if I were telling a friend. When I played it back, I cringed. I was barely breathing between sentences. My words ran together. There was no rhythm, no space. It didn't sound like someone having a conversation. It sounded like someone racing to a finish line. No wonder people couldn't follow me. I didn't even sound like myself. That was the moment it really hit me. I had to change this. Not just because of work, but for my confidence, my relationships, and my sanity. I wanted to be heard. I wanted to be understood. I didn't want my ideas to get lost in a blur of fast words. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this habit had deep roots. I grew up in a loud household. 3 siblings, 2 parents working full-time, a barking dog, and a TV always on in the background. If you wanted to say something at the dinner table, you had to say it fast or risk getting drowned out. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just the way we lived. Speed became survival, but now I was an adult, and this survival tactic was holding me back. My fast talking wasn't helping me. It was hurting me. So I made a decision that night. I opened a blank page in my journal and wrote down a single sentence. Slow down so people can hear you. I didn't know how I would do it yet, but I knew I had to start somewhere. That small promise to myself felt powerful. It was a choice to stop letting fear control my voice. I looked at that sentence again and again. It became a kind of prayer, a reminder that my words mattered, and they deserved space. That same night, I also wrote down a few more questions to guide me. Why do I speak so fast? What am I afraid of? What would happen if I paused and let silence happen between words? These weren't easy questions, but I needed to ask them. The next morning, I showed up at work with a new kind of awareness. I didn't try to change everything all at once. Instead, I just noticed. I paid attention to how I was talking in casual conversations, during meetings, even on the phone with clients. And what I found surprised me. I wasn't just speaking fast, I was barely breathing. My body was tense, my shoulders tight. It was like my entire self was bracing for impact, as if I expected something bad to happen the moment I opened my mouth. That kind of tension isn't sustainable. No wonder I felt exhausted after talking all day. I wasn't communicating, I was surviving. That weekend, I talked to my best friend Sarah about what I was going through. She lives in Atlanta now, and we usually FaceTime once a week. I told her everything. How I was tired of feeling misunderstood, how I wanted to speak more clearly, how I was sick of people asking me to say that again. Sarah listened quietly, then said something I'll never forget. You're one of the smartest people I know, G. Don't let speed steal your strength. That hit me in the heart. I'd been letting my fast talking sabotage the very things I was trying to show. Intelligence, kindness, clarity. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and opened my voice memo app again. This time, I decided to try something different. I chose a simple sentence. Today I went to the store, bought some apples, and made a pie. I said it once, the way I normally would, fast. Then I said it again, but this time I paused between each part. Today, I went to the store, bought some apples, and made a pie. When I played the second version back, I almost didn't recognize myself. It sounded calm. It sounded clear. It sounded like someone I'd want to listen to. That tiny experiment gave me hope. I knew I wasn't going to become a slower speaker overnight, but for the first time, I believed I could change. I started to build a little nighttime habit. Every evening before bed, I'd pick a sentence and practice saying it slowly. Not robotic, just calm. I wasn't trying to sound dramatic or fake. I just wanted to sound real and understandable. I made it a 5-minute ritual, like brushing my teeth. And slowly, over the next few days, I started noticing changes. I caught myself mid-conversation at work and reminded myself, pause. I slowed down just enough to help my coworker understand my suggestion. She smiled and nodded. That tiny moment felt like a win. By the end of that week, I started wondering, if recording myself helped this much, what else could I do to improve? Could I use technology to help me speak better? I wanted more tools, more structure, something I could build on. I didn't want to guess anymore. I wanted to take real, intentional steps. I wanted to hear myself clearly and see the difference in my pace. I had a feeling that voice recording wasn't just a one-time trick. It could become the key to rewiring how I spoke, one word at a time. After that first week of really noticing how fast I talked, I felt like I had opened a door I could never close again. I couldn't unhear the way I sounded. It was like discovering there was a scratch on a record you'd listened to 100 times but never noticed before. Now it was all you could hear. That first experiment, recording myself saying a basic sentence twice, once fast and once slow, had already shown me how different I could sound just by adjusting my pace. But what really surprised me was how that tiny change made me feel. I felt calm. I felt understood, even just by myself. That was a big deal. I had spent so long trying to be heard by other people, I hadn't realized how little I was really listening to my own voice. The next night, I made myself a deal. No more random practice. If I was serious about learning to speak slower, I had to treat it like training. Just like you go to the gym if you want stronger muscles, I had to build stronger speech habits. And for that, I needed a system. I made a small checklist. 1. Choose a sentence. 2. Record it fast, like usual. 3. Record it slow, with pauses. 4. Play both back and compare. 5. Reflect in my journal. It might sound silly, but that little structure gave me focus. It wasn't just practice. It became a ritual, something I actually looked forward to at the end of a long day. I started with everyday phrases. Simple things like, "I'm going to work now," or "Can I get a cup of coffee, please?" I didn't want to overthink it. These were real things I said daily, and they were the same places where I often spoke too fast. At first, the recordings felt awkward. I hated the sound of my own voice. I kept wanting to delete the fast versions because they were a reminder of everything I wanted to change, but I forced myself to listen. I made a rule, no deleting. Every version had something to teach me. And over time, I began to hear things I hadn't before. It wasn't just speed, it was tension. I could actually hear myself rushing, swallowing vowels, and skipping consonants. It was like I was sliding over my own words instead of standing on them. As the days passed, I expanded my practice. I started reading out loud from magazines or books and recording that too. I read articles from Time and National Geographic, pieces that had rhythm and storytelling, so I could mimic natural speech. I read them once quickly and then again slowly, like I was telling a friend the story over coffee. Then I'd listen back and make notes in my journal. I didn't pause here. My T sounds are disappearing. This part sounds clear. It became a personal feedback loop. I didn't need anyone else to tell me how I was doing. I could hear it for myself. One night, after finishing a recording session, I sat back in bed and had a moment of realization. My voice had always been something I tried to hide or control, especially around native English speakers. I'd either rush or shrink. But now, as I listened to myself on those recordings, I began to hear someone else, someone stronger, Someone who wasn't just speaking English, but owning it. I realized that slowing down wasn't just about helping other people understand me, it was about understanding myself. My thoughts had value, my words mattered, and they deserved space. Eventually, I started using my recordings during the day too. When I had a big meeting or phone call coming up, I would rehearse what I wanted to say by recording it first. I'd play it back like a coach reviewing game footage, looking for areas to improve. If a sentence felt rushed or clumsy, I'd redo it until it sounded right. This helped me calm my nerves before stressful conversations. I wasn't just guessing, I had already practiced. The recordings became like a mirror. They showed me my habits, my growth, and my blind spots. One day, I had to give a small presentation at work about a new social media strategy we were testing. Normally, I would have been dreading it. 10 minutes of talking while people stared at me and probably misunderstood half of what I said. But this time, I recorded my whole talk the night before. I practiced it 3 times. Not just the words, but the pace, the breathing, the pauses. I even imagined where people might nod or react. When I gave the actual presentation, I didn't rush. I took my time. I looked around the room and saw people actually listening, writing things down. When I finished, my manager said, "That was clear and strong, Georgiana. Great job." That moment felt like gold. Not because I impressed anyone, but because I had controlled my voice. I had owned my space. And that all came from those recordings I made in the quiet of my bedroom. The more I recorded myself, the more I learned about patterns in my speech. I noticed I always sped up when I was excited or nervous. I'd start a sentence slowly, but then pick up speed like a car rolling downhill. I realized I was afraid of silence, afraid that if I paused, someone would cut me off. But the recordings taught me a secret. Silence is power. When you pause, people lean in. They wait. They listen. The more I practiced pausing and breathing during my recordings, the more I used those tools in real life. Eventually, I started sharing what I was learning with others. I posted a short clip of one of my recordings on Instagram. Just a 30-second voice note where I talked slowly about a book I'd just read. To my surprise, a few friends messaged me and said things like, "You sound so clear," or "I wish I could speak that confidently." That's when I realized this wasn't just a me problem. A lot of people struggle with fast speech, especially those of us who speak English as a second language. We're told to be fluent, to be quick, to sound native. But no one tells us that fluency isn't about speed, it's about connection. After that, I started recording short English phrases and sharing them in a group chat with some coworkers who were also learning English. We would take turns recording the same phrase and then give each other feedback. It wasn't fancy, just WhatsApp voice notes, but it was powerful. It made me feel less alone. We were all trying to find our voices, not just in English, but in life. And hearing each other slow down gave us courage. It reminded us that being understood matters more than being fast. I started keeping a folder on my phone called Voice Growth. It's where I saved all my recordings, good ones, bad ones, all of them. Some days I still listen to the early ones just to remind myself how far I'd come. It's amazing how just hearing yourself talk, really hearing it, can change everything. Your voice stops being a blur and starts becoming something you respect, something you want to shape and protect. Sometimes after a long day, I'd come home, pour myself a glass of iced tea, sit on the couch, and record a little voice diary. Just me, talking about my day. Not for anyone else, just for me. And each time, I'd try to go a little slower, a little clearer, a little more grounded. These recordings became more than language tools. They became therapy, a way to hear myself, to connect with myself. And every now and then, I'd listen back and smile because I didn't just sound better, I sounded like someone who believed in herself. Of course, there were tough days. Times when I slipped back into old habits, when I got nervous on a phone call and spoke too fast again, but the recordings kept me accountable. I could always go back, re-record, and remind myself of what I'd learned. Progress wasn't always a straight line, but it was real. And that was enough to keep going. What I didn't realize at first, but eventually came to understand, is that recording myself didn't just help me speak slower, it helped me speak smarter. I started choosing better words, cleaner sentences. I stopped rambling. I became more aware of how I used my voice, my tone, my rhythm. I didn't want to just talk. I wanted to communicate. I wanted to connect. And those recordings were my training ground. They taught me how to hear myself so others could too. And so recording myself became a daily habit, one that changed my life in ways I never imagined. It made me a better communicator, a better listener, and honestly, a more confident version of myself. But as powerful as those recordings were, they were just the beginning. One night, as I played back a particularly smooth and clear recording, I had an idea. What if I could add something even more powerful to my practice? Something that could bring my speech alive, make it natural, not just slow but meaningful. That's when I discovered the power of using pauses. Not just to slow down, but to shape meaning. Not just to help people understand, but to make them feel what I was saying. The moment I realized I could control the rhythm of my voice was the moment everything began to shift. I had already made recording myself a nightly habit, and I had seen real changes in how I spoke. But one evening, as I listened to a recording I just made while reading a short news article aloud, something clicked. It wasn't just about speaking slowly anymore. It was about how I used my words, the breaks, the timing, the space between thoughts. It was about pauses, those quiet little moments we often try to avoid. And once I noticed them, I couldn't stop thinking about them. That night, I sat in my small studio apartment in Chicago, curled up on my old gray couch with my phone in one hand and a cup of hot tea in the other. It was snowing lightly outside, and the city felt quiet, almost peaceful. I played the recording again. I'd read the article twice, once quickly, then again slowly. And while I could hear the difference in speed, I realized the second version still felt a little off. It didn't feel natural. It was slower, yes, but it didn't sound like something I would actually say to someone face to face. That's when it hit me. I hadn't paused at all. I had slowed the words down, but I was still speaking in one continuous flow, with no breathing space, no emotional rhythm. It was like pouring water out of a pitcher without stopping to sip. I opened my journal and wrote something bold across the page. Pauses equal power. Then underneath, I wrote another note. What if I used pauses the way writers use commas and periods? That one question opened up a whole new world for me. I began thinking about the way people speak when they really want to be understood. Not just heard, but felt. When a teacher gives a lesson and pauses for impact. When a storyteller lets the silence stretch for a second before the punchline. When a leader in a meeting pauses after asking a tough question, giving everyone time to think. That's what I wanted my speech to feel like. Intentional, thoughtful, clear. So, the next night, I recorded myself again. But this time, I tried something new. I didn't just slow down my words, I added short pauses. I literally marked them with dots in the sentence I was reading. For example, I had a sentence that said, "Many people struggle with public speaking because they fear being judged." I wrote it down again as, "Many people struggle with public speaking because they fear being judged." I paused at each break, just like a comma. Not too long, just enough to let the thought breathe. When I played it back, I was stunned. It sounded better, clearer, more confident. It sounded like someone who had thought about what she was saying. The best part? I wasn't rushing anymore. Those little pauses gave me control. They gave the listener a chance to process what I said. And they gave me a chance to catch my breath and feel grounded. I didn't feel out of control or nervous. I felt calm, steady, even a little powerful. It was like discovering a secret weapon I never knew I had. Over the next few weeks, I started practicing this every night. I'd pick a short passage, sometimes from a blog post, sometimes just a few sentences I wrote myself, and I'd mark it up with pause points. I used dots for short pauses and slashes for longer ones. Then I'd read it aloud slowly, using those pauses like commas and periods. It was amazing how different my voice started to sound. I didn't sound rushed or nervous. I sounded like someone who knew exactly what she was saying and why it mattered. I took this skill into real life too. The first time I used intentional pauses during a phone call with a client, I was terrified. My heart was pounding, and I worried that the silence would feel awkward. But it didn't. Not at all. I was explaining a new social media strategy, and instead of cramming all my points into one long sentence, I took a breath between each part. We recommend starting with Instagram because your audience is active there. Then we'll test engagement for 2 weeks and adjust based on performance. That was it. Nothing fancy, just clean, calm communication. And the client responded better than ever. They asked clear follow-up questions and even complimented how organized I sounded. After that, I started using pauses in more places. At work, when speaking up in meetings, at the grocery store, when asking for something, even at the doctor's office when explaining how I was feeling. I wasn't just practicing English anymore. I was living it, shaping it, making it mine. Pauses helped me own my voice. They slowed down time just enough for me to feel safe inside every sentence. And here's what's funny. Once I started using pauses, people began to listen more closely. They made better eye contact. They nodded more. They didn't interrupt me as often. It was like I was giving them room to be part of the conversation. I realized something most people never think about. We don't just listen with our ears. We listen with our silence. When we pause, we invite people in. We let our words land. I even started listening differently too. When someone else spoke, I started noticing their rhythm, their pauses, their speed. I noticed that confident speakers almost always take their time. They use silence as a tool. They let their words settle before rushing to the next point. I remember watching a TED Talk one night, and instead of focusing on the content, I focused on the speaker's delivery. She paused after every big idea, and that's what made the message powerful. She didn't say more. She said less, but gave it space. That's when I began practicing speaking with emotion. Not just words, not just pauses, but real feeling. I'd take a sentence and say it with different tones and different pauses. For example, "I didn't expect that" could be said as surprise, sarcasm, sadness, or joy, just by changing where I paused. "I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that." It was like acting class in my living room, and it helped me become more expressive, more human, more me. Some evenings, I'd even script out little conversations. I'd write dialogue like a scene from a movie, just between me and an imaginary friend. Then I'd record myself acting it out, using pauses, pacing, and tone to make it feel real. It was fun, silly sometimes, but so valuable. These tiny practices helped me show up better in real conversations, especially with native speakers, where I used to feel frozen. And believe me, there were awkward moments. One time, I paused too long during a presentation, and someone jumped in, thinking I was done. Another time, I got self-conscious about how I sounded and went back to rushing again. But each time, I came back to the same truth. Speaking slowly doesn't mean speaking less. It means speaking better. Pauses don't make you look weak. They make you sound confident. I began writing little pause cues into my notes when I prepared for meetings. I'd put 3 dots where I wanted to pause or underline a phrase I wanted to emphasize. It was like learning a new kind of punctuation, spoken punctuation. And I'll never forget the day my manager said, "Georgiana, I really appreciate how clear you are when you explain things. You give people time to follow along." That compliment was like a medal to me. I had worked so hard for that moment, and it all started with one tiny habit: listening to myself and letting silence do some of the talking. Now, when I walk into a room, I don't feel the urge to rush. I take a breath. I speak when I'm ready. I use pauses to guide my words like commas on a page. I no longer feel like I'm running from sentence to sentence. I feel like I'm leading a journey, one word at a time. But there was still one big challenge I had to face: how to practice all of this out loud, in real life, even when I was nervous or embarrassed. Speaking slowly in a recording is one thing. Speaking slowly in public, when all eyes are on you, is something else entirely. By the time I started practicing pauses in my speech, I thought I was finally getting the hang of this whole slow down and speak clearly thing. My nightly recordings had become a part of my routine, like brushing my teeth or setting my alarm. I had grown more confident listening to myself, and I began feeling more in control of my voice. But there was one thing that still scared me more than anything: talking slowly in front of other people. Not into my phone, not into a voice memo, but in real life, with real people in real conversations. That's where I struggled most, and I knew I had to face it. Recording myself gave me a safe place to grow. It was just me alone in my cozy studio apartment with no pressure, no one watching. I could pause for as long as I needed, say the same sentence 5 different ways, and nobody would judge me. But out there in the world, at work, at the grocery store, at the bank, there were eyes, ears, expectations. People were busy. They didn't have time to wait for me to collect my thoughts or finish my perfectly paced sentence. That's what I told myself anyway, but deep down, I knew I was making excuses. I had spent so long hiding behind fast words, hoping no one would notice my fear. Now that I was learning to slow down, I had to be brave enough to let people actually hear me. The first time I decided to apply my new speaking habits in the real world, I was at a coffee shop a few blocks from my apartment. It was one of those places where the baristas know your name and the floor is always just a little sticky. I had been there 100 times before, always ordering the same thing: medium caramel latte, almond milk, no whip. Usually I would rattle it off in one quick breath. Can I get a medium caramel latte mo and de milk no whip? Just like that. No pauses, no eye contact, just speed. I didn't want to waste anyone's time. But that day, I stood in line rehearsing in my head. I was going to do it differently. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the counter, took a breath, looked the barista in the eye, and said, "Hi, can I please have a medium caramel latte with almond milk? No whip?" I tried to keep my voice calm, my tone even. I used the same pauses I practiced the night before. It felt like the sentence lasted forever. I could feel my cheeks getting hot, but something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not a weird look, not a raised eyebrow, just a friendly, "Sure thing, that'll be $5.25. That was it. No awkward silence, no judgment, just a normal exchange. But to me, it felt like a win, a big one. That small moment gave me the confidence to keep trying. I started looking for other low-pressure situations to practice speaking slowly, ordering food, asking for directions, even chatting with the cashier at Walgreens. At first, it was hard. I was hyper-aware of every word, every pause, every shift in people's expressions. I worried that I sounded strange or that I was taking too long. But each time, I reminded myself that I wasn't doing this to impress anyone. I was doing it to grow. Work was the next big test. I had a weekly team check-in every Monday morning, and I usually kept quiet unless someone asked me something directly. But that week, I decided I would speak up. Not just mumble something or toss in a comment, but actually say something clearly and intentionally. I picked one point I wanted to share and practiced it the night before. I wrote it out, recorded it 3 times, and chose where I'd pause. It wasn't a speech, it was just a short idea, but it mattered to me. When Monday rolled around, I waited for the right moment, took a breath, and spoke. I think if we post the new content on Thursday morning, we'll get more engagement. Last week's numbers were stronger on that day. I paused between each thought, just like I'd practiced. I didn't rush. I didn't let the nerves win. When I finished, the room was quiet for a second, and then my manager nodded and said, "That's a good point. Let's try that this week." My chest swelled with pride. It was a simple suggestion, but I had delivered it with clarity and confidence, and it had been heard. Of course, not every moment was perfect. There were times when I slipped back into fast talking mode. Once, I got nervous during a client call and caught myself speeding up like I was racing the clock. My palms got sweaty, and I could feel my throat tightening. But then I remembered what I'd practiced. I stopped talking for just 2 seconds. I let the silence settle. And then I continued, slower this time, steady, and sure. That small pause saved me. I walked away from that call feeling like I had taken another step forward. One of the most difficult places to practice was on the phone. Without body language or facial expressions, I always felt more pressure to fill the silence. It was harder to pause, to breathe, to let my words land. I hated that empty space, but I knew it was important. So I started making phone calls on purpose, calling customer service for my internet provider, scheduling dentist appointments, even ordering takeout instead of using an app. I needed the practice. I would stand by the window in my apartment, holding my phone in one hand and pressing the other to my chest to keep myself grounded. "Hi, I'd like to schedule a cleaning for next week, please." I said it slowly, clearly, and the more I did it, the more natural it began to feel. The turning point came during a family visit to see my aunt in St. Louis. My cousins are all native English speakers, and I'd always felt self-conscious around them. In the past, I would rush through conversations, trying to keep up, trying to hide the fact that English wasn't my first language. But this time, I made a promise to myself. I was going to speak slowly, even if it felt weird. At dinner, my cousin asked me about work, and I answered with intention. Things have been busy, but in a good way. I'm learning a lot, and I'm getting better at speaking up in meetings. She didn't blink. She just smiled and said, "That's awesome. I'm so proud of you." I almost teared up. It felt like I had broken through something, not just with her, but with myself. From then on, I made it my mission to practice every single day, no matter what. I practiced in the elevator, in the car, in line at the pharmacy. I slowed down when talking to friends. I paused when texting or emailing too, just to train my brain to stop rushing. I even joined a local book club where we read short stories and discussed them every week. It gave me a safe space to practice speaking slowly with new people. I told myself, this is my training ground. And it worked. There were awkward moments, for sure. Like the time I paused too long at a team lunch and someone jumped in, thinking I'd finished. Or the time I stumbled over a sentence in front of my boss and forgot what I was saying. But even those moments were valuable. They taught me that speaking slowly isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about giving yourself permission to be heard. Over time, the awkwardness faded. What started as a challenge turned into a strength. People began noticing. A coworker said, "I like how you speak, calm and clear." A friend told me, "You're easier to talk to now, you really listen, and you make people feel heard." I couldn't believe it. The very thing I used to be embarrassed about, my voice, had become something people admired. But more than anything, I started to like my own voice. I liked how it sounded when I wasn't rushing. I liked the confidence I felt when I paused. I liked the way my words flowed when I took my time. Speaking slowly in real life had helped me become not just a better speaker, but a better version of myself. And then, something unexpected happened. People started asking me how I did it. A coworker who also struggled with fast speech pulled me aside one day and said, "You've gotten so much better at speaking in meetings. Can you share what's worked for you?" I smiled, took a breath, and told her the truth. I practiced a lot, at home, out loud, every day, and then I just kept going, even when it felt awkward. She nodded, and I could tell it gave her hope. And that's when it hit me. I had come full circle. I had gone from being afraid to speak to helping others find their own voice. It took me a long time to fully understand the power of speaking slowly. For so many years, I thought slow meant unsure, weak, or lacking intelligence. I had grown up around people who spoke fast and loud, who jumped in before others could finish, who believed that speed meant strength. It didn't help that every time I spoke slowly, I felt the heat of judgment in people's eyes, or at least what I imagined was judgment. The silence after I paused felt like a spotlight I didn't ask for. In a world that moves fast, especially in America where every second counts, it felt like I was dragging behind. But the more I practiced, the more I challenged those old ideas. And eventually, I began to see something that changed everything. Speaking slowly isn't a weakness. It's a sign of strength, confidence, and self-respect. It took awkward conversations, failed attempts, and small victories to get there, but when I did, it transformed the way I viewed not just English, but myself. I started noticing how powerful speakers, really powerful ones, used silence like punctuation. They didn't rush. They didn't apologize for the time they took. Think about a great leader or public speaker. Do they race through their words? No. They control the room with their voice, not because they shout, but because they're steady, deliberate, and calm. They know exactly what they want to say, and they trust that their message matters. That realization hit me hard one day when I was watching a TED Talk by a female speaker who had the audience in the palm of her hand. She didn't speak quickly. She spoke with control, with rhythm, with intention. Her pauses were powerful. I remember thinking, she's not afraid of silence. That's when I knew what I had to work on next. Not just speaking slowly, but owning my pace like a strength, not something I needed to apologize for. The idea really started to sink in during one of our weekly meetings at work. I had grown used to sharing my thoughts slowly, with pauses, and my team had gotten used to hearing me that way. But that day, we had a guest from another department, a fast talker with a lot of energy. He presented his ideas at lightning speed, jumping from point to point. I could barely keep up. I felt myself slipping back into that old mindset, the one that says, "You better speak faster or they'll think you don't know what you're doing." I could feel my heart rate pick up, my palms sweaty, but then I remembered what I'd been practicing. I took a deep breath and grounded myself. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't rush to match his pace. I stayed calm. I paused. I spoke slowly and clearly, even as my nerves threatened to take over. And something incredible happened. People leaned in. They nodded. They listened. After the meeting, my manager pulled me aside and said, "I appreciate how you explained your points, so clear and thoughtful." I didn't even need to explain how hard it was to stay slow. That comment said it all. What I had thought would be a weakness, slowness, was actually the thing that helped me stand out. While everyone else was talking fast, interrupting, filling space with noise, I was doing something different. I was giving space to the conversation. I was letting my words land. I realized that the courage to speak slowly in a fast world is rare, and that rarity makes it valuable. That's the thing about confidence. It doesn't always show up as loud and fast. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's calm. Sometimes it takes a breath and waits. And that's okay. I also started to see how people reacted to me differently when I was intentional with my words. My friends began turning to me for advice. One of them even said, "You're such a good listener, and when you talk, I always feel like what you say matters." That stunned me. I used to feel invisible in conversations, like I had to fight to be heard. But by slowing down and speaking with care, I had created space for deeper connection. It wasn't just about English anymore. It was about how I carried myself, how I interacted with people, and how I respected my own voice. One of the biggest challenges came when I had to give a short presentation for a local nonprofit I volunteered with. I was nervous, but I had prepared well. My topic was about community outreach, and I wanted to make an impact. The old me would have tried to speak fast to get it over with, but the new me, the one who had learned the value of slowness, approached it differently. I practiced with purpose. I highlighted the key points. I timed my pauses. I even recorded myself giving the talk, just like I used to in my apartment. When the day came, I stood in front of the small audience and spoke with confidence. I didn't rush. I let each sentence breathe. And when I finished, people clapped, not just politely, but with genuine warmth. Afterward, one of the attendees said, "You spoke with such clarity. You made me want to listen." I'll never forget that moment. It proved to me that speaking slowly isn't just about technique. It's about presence. It's about strength. Another surprising moment came at my niece's school. They were doing a storytelling day, and my sister asked if I could read to her class. I said yes, thinking it would be easy. But when I stood in front of a room full of second graders, all staring at me with bright, curious eyes, I froze for a second. I realized that kids don't fake their reactions. They're either interested or they're not. I opened the book and started reading, slowly, clearly, with pauses and expression. I changed my tone, adjusted my volume, and let the story come alive through rhythm. And you know what? They stayed with me. Every single one. No one fidgeted. No one looked bored. They listened, and when I finished, one little girl said, "You read like the people on TV." I smiled and knelt down. I used to be really scared to talk in front of people, I told her. But I practiced, and I learned that going slow helps people understand better. Her eyes lit up. I want to try that too. That made my heart full. I realized that by owning my voice, I was giving others permission to do the same. Over time, I became more than just a learner. I became someone people looked to for guidance. Colleagues started asking me for tips on communication. Friends asked how I stayed so calm when speaking, and each time I told them the truth. It wasn't easy. It took practice, mistakes, and a lot of moments where I felt like giving up. But I kept going because I finally believed that my voice deserved to be heard, not despite being slow, but because of it. Looking back, I realized how wrong I was to think that fast equals smart or strong. Some of the smartest, most grounded people I've ever met speak slowly. They don't rush. They're not in a hurry to prove themselves. They already know their worth. That's what I learned to model. Not the speed of their speech, but the steadiness of their self-belief. Speaking slowly doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing. It means you're so sure of what you're saying, you don't need to race through it. You don't need to fight for attention. You already have it. I remember one night sitting on my couch with a mug of tea, reflecting on how far I'd come. I used to be afraid to speak, afraid of being judged, misunderstood, or dismissed. I used to hide behind fast words, hoping no one would notice my nerves. But now, I speak with pride. Not loudly, not perfectly, but slowly, intentionally, and with meaning. I've learned that slowing down isn't just a language skill. It's a life skill. It helps you connect more deeply, think more clearly, and live more fully. So if you're someone who's afraid to slow down, who feels pressure to keep up with everyone else, I want you to know this. There is power in your pace. Slow doesn't mean unsure. It doesn't mean unprepared. It doesn't mean small. It means you're listening to yourself and to others. It means you're not afraid to be seen. And that, to me, is the very definition of strength.